I moved into the cabin in the Appalachian mountains at the beginning of December because I needed to vanish for a while. That's the truth I never said out loud. To my family, I called it a break. To my friends, it was a writing retreat. But really, I was running from a life that had grown too loud, too crowded, and too heavy to carry anymore. The cabin sat deep in the mountains, more than 10 miles from the nearest paved road. My uncle had owned it for years before he passed. No electricity from the grid, no internet. Limited cell service that came and went with the wind. Just trees, snow, and silence. The first few days were peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. Snow covered everything in thick, clean layers. The forest looked frozen in time. During the day, I chopped wood, cooked simple meals, and walked along a narrow trail that led toward a half-frozen creek. At night, I read by lantern light and listened to the wind move through the branches like a low, endless whisper. I slept deeply at first, the kind of sleep that comes when you finally feel alone. The first strange thing happened on the 4th night. I woke suddenly in the dark, not from a dream, but from a sound soft, metallic. A faint click. I lay still, heart pounding, listening. The sound didn't repeat. The cabin was silent again except for the crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. In the morning, I checked the front door. Still locked. No sign of tampering. No footprints outside. I told myself it had been the wood contracting from the cold. The second incident was harder to explain. 2 days later, I returned from a short walk and found the cabin door slightly open. Just a few inches. Cold air spilled out like something exhaling. I stood there for a long time, staring into the dark space inside. I was certain I had locked the door. I always did. Inside, nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But something felt adjusted. My mug was on the counter instead of the table where I'd left it. The fire poker leaned on the opposite side of the hearth. My unease stayed with me for the rest of the day. After that, small changes became a pattern. Objects shifted. My boots were lined up neatly one morning when I knew I'd kicked them off carelessly the night before. Once, I found a cabinet slightly open that I didn't remember using. The changes were subtle, small enough to doubt, but consistent enough to gnaw at my thoughts. By the end of the first week, I began to feel watched. It wasn't a clear sensation. Not at first. Just a pressure between my shoulders whenever I stepped outside. I'd stop chopping wood and look toward the tree line, convinced someone was standing just out of view. But there was never anyone there. Then came the footprints. Fresh snow had fallen overnight. When I opened the door that morning, I saw a single line of footprints leading from the forest straight to my porch. They stopped 6 feet from the door and turned back exactly the same way. No attempt to approach further. No knock, just a silent visit in the dark. The prints were narrow. Whoever made them walked slowly, carefully. I drove into the nearest town that afternoon for supplies I didn't actually need, just to be around other people. The town was small, just a diner, a gas station, and a general store. I casually asked the woman working the register if anyone lived near the old Ridge Road cabins. She paused before answering. "Not anymore," she said. "What about people passing through?" I asked. She studied my face for a moment. "Not in winter." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. That night, I heard footsteps outside. They moved slowly along the side of the cabin. Crunch, pause. Crunch. The sound stopped near the back window. I killed the lantern and crouched in the dark, barely breathing. A shadow passed across the frost-covered glass. Then the footsteps retreated. In the morning, the snow was smooth again. No tracks. 2 days later, my generator wouldn't start. When I opened the panel, I found the wiring cut clean through. Not weather damage. Not where a deliberate cut. Someone had been right there on my porch while I slept. I went to my truck to leave immediately. 2 of the tires were sliced open. That's when the fear became real. I barricaded the doors before nightfall, dragging heavy furniture across both entrances. I fed the fire until the cabin grew unbearably warm. I sat with the hunting rifle my uncle had left me, staring at the front door. Sometime after midnight, there were 3 soft knocks, not loud, not urgent, 3 patient taps. "I have a gun," I called out, my voice shaking. "Leave now." Silence followed. Then a dragging sound came from the back of the cabin logs, scraping against wood. He was blocking the rear exit. The knocking returned every night after that. Always 3 taps. Never more. Nevertheless, on the 4th night, a voice finally spoke from the other side of the door. "I see you when you go outside," the man said calmly. "You walk like someone who doesn't want to be followed." My throat closed. "You're trespassing," I said. "The police are on their way." A soft sound like a quiet exhale of amusement. "No service up here." He was right. He talked to me through the door after that, never raising his voice, never sounding angry. He told me he had watched others come and go. Some stayed longer than they meant to. That winter always showed what people really were. On the 6th night, he tried the back door. The logs shifted violently. The door groaned inward under I fired 1 warning shot through the wood. The pressure stopped instantly. After that, the silence returned, to complete, to final dot. At first light, I broke through the rear blockade and ran into the forest, following the frozen creek downhill toward where the main road had to be. I could hear footsteps behind me, not rushing, not gaining, just pacing me, always keeping the same distance. When the road finally emerged from the trees, my truck was gone. I didn't stop running. I kept moving until my lungs burned and my legs trembled. Eventually, headlights appeared on the road. I waved desperately until the vehicle stopped. The driver took 1 look at me and unlocked the door without asking questions. The police searched the area for 2 days. They found the damaged generator, the blocked doors, the cut tires, the footprints near the porch. They didn't find the man. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no explanation. I left the same day. Months later, after the snow melted, a hiker discovered a shallow burial site behind the tree line near the cabin. Inside were personal belongings belonging to a man reported missing from a nearby town 3 years earlier. The police never officially connected that discovery to what happened to me, but I know what I heard in the dark. And sometimes, in quiet rooms far from the mountains, I still wake at night with the feeling that someone is standing just beyond the door, waiting for 3 soft knocks to be answered. I took the winter caretaker job because no one else wanted it. That was what the ranger at the district office told me when he slid the thin manila folder across the desk. "Most people quit after the first week," he said, not unkindly. "Too isolated, too quiet, too much snow." Isolation was exactly what I was looking for. The property was an old fire lookout station deep in the Appalachian backcountry, restored just enough to be usable. No road access from December through March. Supplier's weight route once a month by snowcat, if the weather allowed. My job was simple on paper. Keep the generator running, log weather data, and radio in once every evening at precisely 8 o'clock. That was it. No patrols. No visitors. No hiking traffic in winter. I hiked the final 5 miles up to the lookout on December 3rd, the 3rd with a pack so heavy my shoulders burned. By the time the tower came into view dark and skeletal against a white sky, my legs were shaking. The building stood on a ridgeline overlooking miles of silent forest. The nearest inhabited structure was more than 20 miles away. For the first week, nothing happened. The days passed in a slow, frozen rhythm. Wake up, check the fuel, record the wind and temperature, melt snow for water, and dread by the stove at night. The wind never fully stopped. It moaned through the trees and rattled the metal skin of the tower like distant breathing at night. The darkness felt thick enough to touch. The first odd thing I noticed was the radio. Every night at 8, I'd flip it on and call the district office. Most nights, I'd get the same tired dispatcher. Sometimes there was static, but I always got through. On the 9th night, at exactly 8, I turned the knob and heard a voice already on the channel. Breathing slow, deliberate. I froze, with my hand still on the controls. After 3 breaths, the channel went dead. When I called in, the dispatcher answered like nothing was wrong. She said there had been no incoming signal before mine. The breathing happened again the next night, and the next dot, always at 8, always just before I called. I told myself it was interference. Atmospheric conditions. Anything but what my nerves suggested. On the 12th day, I found footprints circling the tower. They were light impressions, half filled with blown snow. Whoever made them had walked slow loops around the base, as if studying it. I followed them until they vanished into the trees. No other tracks led in or out that night. I locked the hatch that led up into the sleeping area and kept the rifle beside my bed. At 7:59 p.m., I sat by the radio and waited at exactly 8. The breathing came through again. This time, it was closer, louder, as if the person on the other end was pressing their mouth directly against their microphone. Hello. I said before I could stop myself. Silence. When the dispatcher finally answered my check-in call, her voice was normal, unconcerned. She logged my status and signed off. I didn't mention the breathing. I should have. A few days later, I noticed the food crate had been opened. It wasn't empty. That was the strange part. Just disturbed. A few cans shifted. My flour sack torn slightly at the corner. Not the careful mess of an animal. More like someone had searched through it in a hurry and then tried to make it look untouched. I began taking inventory every morning. 1 can of soup disappeared on December 18th. 2 protein bars vanished on the 20th. My sense of being alone began to rot from the inside. The storm hit the following night. Snow fell so hard it erased the world beyond the windows. The wind howled against the tower with such force that the whole structure trembled in its joints. I fed the stove constantly, sweating in the heat while ice crept along the window frames. At 1:17 a.m., the generator stopped. The sudden silence was absolute. I pulled on my boots and coat and went down the ladder with a flashlight clenched in my fist. The wind nearly knocked me over when I opened the door at the base. Snow blasted my face. I fought my way to the generator shed and wrenched the door open. The fuel line had been disconnected. Cleanly, my hands went numb as I reattached it. The generator roared back to life like a wounded animal. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam swept across the far edge of the clearing dot. Something moved. Not a deer, not a bear. A human shape slipped behind a tree and vanished. I stood there in the snow long after the light settled on empty bark. The radio breathing grew heavier after that. I stopped calling in at night. I claimed radio failure in my written logs and hoped someone would notice. No one did. On Christmas Eve, the ladder rungs were smeared with something dark. Blood. It wasn't a lot. Just thin streaks along the metal. I followed them down to the base door, where they disappeared into the snow. I locked myself inside and didn't come down again for 2 days. On the third night, the voice finally spoke. It came through the radio at 8, as it always did. "I've been careful with you." The voice was soft, intimate, the kind people use when they don't want to startle animals. "You didn't scream the first time you saw me." "That's good." I felt my limbs go numb. "I live where the towers can't see," he continued. "People send eyes into the forest, but they never send ears." I tried to transmit a distress signal. The radio only hissed. "I needed the storm," he said. "I needed you to be brave." The words didn't make sense then. They did soon enough. That night, I heard the ladder shift. Slow, careful. One rung at a time. My rifle felt small in my hands as I backed into the corner of the sleeping loft. The ladder creaked again. Shadows stretched upward as the beam of a flashlight rose with the climber. "I don't want to hurt you," the voice whispered from below. "I just don't want to be alone anymore." The rifle went off, without me remembering pulling the trigger. Man fell backward into the darkness, with a shout that cut off halfway down. I didn't move for hours. Dawn came grey and thin. When I finally climbed down, there was blood at the base of the ladder. A lot of it, a trail leading away into the trees, and nothing else. I radioed for evacuation. The rescue team arrived 2 days later when the weather cleared. They followed the blood trail for nearly a mile before it vanished beneath drifting snow and rock. They never found the body. What they did find, half buried in a shallow cave beyond the ridge, was a stash. Canned food, clothes from multiple people, batteries, radio equipment. A handwritten log of transmissions copied word for word from the district frequency. My transmissions, he had been listening to me long before I arrived. The department shut the station down permanently after that winter. Officially for structural concerns, unofficially. No one wanted to admit that someone had lived unnoticed between their towers for who knows how long. I still don't know if the man survived the fall from the ladder. Sometimes I tell myself he did. Sometimes I hear breathing in the static when I'm alone at night and wonder if he ever really left the mountains at all. I rented the farmhouse because it was cheap, remote, and available immediately in December 3. Things that should have made me suspicious, but didn't at the time. I was running from a life that had quietly and completely collapsed. Divorce, job loss, a string of decisions I didn't want to see reflected back at me in familiar faces. The listing called it restored. That was generous. The house sat alone at the edge of a wide, frozen field in a shallow mountain valley in the Appalachian foothills. Miles from the nearest neighbor, one gravel road that vanished into the forest in both directions. Power lines ran to the property, but cell service was unreliable. The owner lived 3 hours away and mailed me the key. The first week felt like exile in the best way. The farmhouse was small but sturdy. Wood-paneled walls, 2 bedrooms, a porch that creaked under fresh snow. The field behind the house sloped upward into thick tree cover. Every morning, fog pooled low over the ground like breaths trapped between the hills. The silence was constant, but not empty. It was layered with distant wind. The soft shifting of trees, the faraway bark of something I never saw at night. The darkness was absolute. The first sign that something was wrong was so small I almost dismissed it. My boots moved. I always left them beside the back door because the front porch steps were iced over. One morning, they were lined neatly against the wall instead of kicked off in their usual careless sprawl. I shrugged it off. Muscle memory. Bad sleep. 2 days later, the same thing happened. That night, I started locking all the doors, not just the front one. I told myself it was only because I was so far from town. By the middle of December, I began losing time, not whole hours, just gaps, moments that didn't add up. I'd set water to boil and return to find it cold again, the flame long gone. I'd wake to find the fireplace still warm despite having let it die out before bed. Once, I found a plate on the table that I didn't remember using, scraped clean with a fork I hadn't washed. I wondered if stress had simply caught up with me. Then came the footsteps. The sound started one night, just after midnight. Soft, measured steps on the porch. Not pacing, not nervous, purposeful. They moved from one end of the porch to the other, paused, then returned the opposite way. I stared at the ceiling while the sound repeated, back and forth, back and forth. At one point, the steps stopped directly outside the bedroom window. I held my breath, my body rigid in the dark. After a long, quiet stretch, the walking resumed and eventually faded away. Morning brought no tracks. Snow fell overnight, but it hadn't started until hours after the sounds stopped. The porch was clean except for my own earlier footprints. After that, the footsteps came every night. Sometimes they circled the porch. Sometimes they climbed the steps and stopped at the door. Once or twice, they walked all the way along the side of the house beneath the windows. I never heard knocking, never listened to a voice, just the calm, unhurried movement of someone who knew exactly where they were. I tried leaving on December 19th. I loaded my car and headed for town at first light. I got to miles down the gravel road before I saw the tree. It was a thick, freshly cut pine, dropped directly across the road. I parked and got out, convinced it must have fallen naturally in the night. But the cut at the base was clean. I drove back to the farmhouse with my chest tight and my eyes on the tree line the entire way. That afternoon, I found a note on my kitchen table. It was a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly in half. No envelope. You don't need to go anywhere. You're safe here. My hands shook so badly Artie dropped it on the floor. The footsteps came earlier that night. They stopped at the front door. There's a roadblock, I said out loud, my voice hoarse. I'm calling the police. Silence on the other side. Then, very softly, a man's voice answered. You already tried to leave. The way he said it wasn't angry. It sounded almost patient. You cut the tree, I whispered. I keep the road closed in winter, he said. Accidents happen out there. I pressed my back against the wall, phone in my hand. No service. You've been in my house, I said. Another long pause. Yes. My throat closed. I cleaned when you forget, he continued. You drop things when you're tired. The idea of him moving through the house while I slept, touching my things, aligning my life with quiet, careful hands, sent a wave of nausea through me. You need to leave, I said. Now. I can't, he replied. Not anymore. That was when I ran for the back door. The lock wouldn't turn. I slammed into it with my shoulder once, twice. The wood held. Nails had been driven through the frame from the outside. The footsteps shifted, closer to the front door. You don't understand yet, the voice said calmly. This place needed someone again. The house was empty for a long time. I kept it standing until you came. My mind raced through everything I knew about the valley. The lack of neighbors, the absence of lights at night, the empty road. How long have you been here? I asked. The answer was immediate. Longer than the last family, shorter than the one before them. The implication hollowed out my chest. I retreated into the living room with the fireplace poker raised in my trembling hands. The handle of the front door turned slowly, deliberately. Locked. A quiet sound of metal scraping metal followed. Then another. He was picking the lock. The door opened inward an inch. I screamed. Not words. Just sound. The door froze. Then slowly closed again. You're not ready, he said through the wood. It takes time. The footsteps retreated off the porch. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I forced open a window and climbed out into the snow. My car sat useless in the drive, its tires slashed clean through the sidewalls. I ran anyway across the open field, toward the thick trees, lungs burning with the cold. I made it less than 100 yards before I tripped over something hidden beneath the snow. It was another note, weighed down by a stone. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I wasn't chased. I wasn't even followed. I went back to the house because I had nowhere else to go. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of cold and terror. He came every night, never entering, just speaking through the door, saying my name, talking about the house as if it were a living thing, talking about me like I were already part of it. You stopped the leaks in the roof, he said one night. I liked that. You opened the south curtains, he said, to another. The light hurts in winter. On the 4th night, he tried the back door again. The nails groaned under pressure. I attacked the door from the inside with the poker, splintering wood until daylight showed through. I screamed until my throat bled. I don't know how long the struggle lasted. I only know that at some point, the pressure stopped when the sun rose. So did the sound of engines. A snowplow roared down the gravel road like a miracle. I burst out of the house barefoot, waving my arms in the drifting snow. The driver slammed on the brakes when he saw me. Police followed within minutes. They searched the farmhouse, the field, the tree line. They found the notes, the blocked exits, the cut tree down the road. They also found a hidden crawl space beneath the back bedroom. It was stocked carefully. Canned food, bottled water, blankets, a folding chair facing a narrow vent that opened into my bedroom wall. He had been watching me sleep. They never found him. No fingerprints anywhere in the house. No tracks leading into the woods. No record of anyone living legally on that land for decades. When I left the valley, The officer driving me out kept glancing into his rearview mirror. "People disappear up here sometimes," he said. "Not always the way news stories make it sound." I still wait the sound of footsteps moving across a porch that no longer exists. And in those moments before I'm fully conscious, I feel a crushing certainty. The house in the valley is empty again, and something out there is waiting for it to be occupied once more.